Hey guys, tonight we drift back to an age of thunder and ambition. An age when one man's dreams were so vast, they threatened to swallow a continent whole. The candles flicker, the room feels smaller, and out there, somewhere in the distance, you can almost hear the rhythmic stomp of 1,000 boots on cobblestone. You're not safe, not really, because tonight, you're walking beside a young Corsican who will one day shake the world, and you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments so I know where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The smell of salt clings to your clothes. It's 1769, and you're standing on the rugged island of Corsica, a land of rocky hills, olive trees, and stubborn independence. Only a year ago, this island had been annexed by France, and the locals aren't thrilled. Among them is a wiry, restless boy named Napoleon Bonaparte. His father, Carlo, is an ambitious lawyer with dreams bigger than his purse. His mother, Letizia, is the kind of woman who can make 10 children behave with just a stare. You can almost see her shaping the discipline that will one day command empires. Napoleon grows up between two worlds, Corsican at heart, but educated under the French flag. When he's sent to military school in Brienne, France at age 9, he's mocked for his accent, his manners, even his clothes. He smells like garlic, the other boys whisper. You wince a little for him. He stands apart, isolated, his Italian-tinged French making him sound like an intruder in a polished world. But isolation breeds something in him, hunger, a spark of defiance. He buries himself in books, devouring Plutarch, Caesar, and Rousseau. Power, he thinks, comes to those who seize it. Even as a boy, he's calculating trajectories of cannonballs, of careers, of destiny itself. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's early genius was natural or the product of sheer will. Maybe both. He's the kind of student who can ace geometry before breakfast and start an argument about Voltaire by lunch. At 16, he graduates from the École Militaire in Paris, second lieutenant of artillery. Not bad for a kid from a forgotten island. You can almost feel his satisfaction as he slips into his crisp new uniform. Navy blue, brass buttons, and just enough shine to make his enemies underestimate him. France, however, is falling apart. It's the late 1780s, and the monarchy is tottering under debt and discontent. You stroll through the narrow Paris streets, hearing murmurs of bread prices, privilege, and revolution. When the Bastille falls in 1789, Napoleon is just 20. The world he studied is collapsing, and that chaos is his opportunity. He starts small. In 1793, royalist forces seize the southern port of Toulon, backed by the British fleet. The French Republic, desperate, sends reinforcements. For a brief moment, the smoke clears, and you see him, dusty, exhausted, but triumphant. The Republic rewards him with a promotion to brigadier general. He's 24. A lucky man, some officers grumble. A dangerous man, others whisper. They're both right. Then comes a strange turn. Napoleon supports the revolutionary government, but his loyalty isn't to any ideology. It's to efficiency. He despises chaos, and France has plenty of it. The reign of terror begins. Heads fall. Even heroes vanish. In 1795, royalists march on Paris, threatening to topple the Republic. The government panics, calling for help. You watch as Napoleon, cool as marble, orders his troops to load grapeshot and aims his cannons down the narrow Parisian streets. The smoke explodes, and within minutes, the uprising is crushed. A whiff of grapeshot, people call it. A moment that saves the Republic and makes him famous. Now, doors open. The once mocked Corsican is suddenly the darling of the Directory. He's given command of the Army of Italy, a post that sounds like punishment since the troops are starving and unpaid. But when you arrive with him at the front, something electric happens. Napoleon rides among his men, cloak billowing, eyes sharp as bayonets. He promises glory, not rations. Somehow, it works. What follows is a storm of victories. Montanati, Lodi, Arcole. You feel the ground shake under cannon fire, the metallic taste of gunpowder on your tongue. The French troops adore him. The enemy fears him. He fights, not like the generals of old, but like an engineer conducting an experiment. Every maneuver is geometry in motion. Every victory, a proof of his theorem that speed and surprise can conquer numbers. There's a story, probably apocryphal but too good to skip, about how, during one battle, he personally seized a cannon and aimed it when his gunners fell. He fired it himself, soldiers claim later. He was everywhere. Maybe it's legend, maybe not, but the image sticks. Napoleon, smoke-streaked, fearless, moving through chaos like he owns it. By 1797, the once starving army of Italy is parading through Venice and Vienna, forcing Austria to sue for peace. The young general returns to Paris a hero. Crowds cheer, pamphlets glorify him, and the politicians who once ignored him now flinch at his name. He's only 28. You can almost see the thought forming behind his calm exterior. If I can conquer kingdoms, why not govern France? Still, he's not done experimenting. The Directory, fearing his ambition, sends him far away, to Egypt. Bring civilization to the East, they say. In truth, they just want him out of Europe. You follow him through shimmering heat and endless dunes. The pyramids loom on the horizon, ancient and silent. Soldiers, he declares, 40 centuries look down upon you. A chill runs down your spine. He's not just fighting battles anymore, he's performing them. The Egyptian campaign, though glorious on paper, is a disaster in practice. The British Navy under Admiral Nelson annihilates his fleet at Abu Qir Bay. You're stranded with him in the desert, cut off from France. Yet somehow, he turns defeat into myth, organizing scholars, studying ruins, sketching maps. Out of this failure comes something peculiar, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's army cared about archaeology or just wanted souvenirs. But you can't deny the irony. His failed conquest unlocked the secret of ancient writing. By 1799, France is collapsing again. The Directory is corrupt, the wars are endless, and the people are exhausted. Napoleon sneaks back across the Mediterranean, slipping past British patrols like a ghost. When he arrives in Paris, he's greeted not as a deserter, but as a savior. The timing, as always, is perfect. You stand beside him in the smoky chambers of the French legislature. Soldiers guard the doors. Politicians shout. Napoleon steps forward, calm, commanding, and declares the Republic dead. Within hours, the coup of August 19th Brumaire is complete. The crowd stares as he takes control of France, not as a monarch, not yet, but as first consul. The revolution that began with cries of liberty now ends in a single man's hands. You can almost hear him whisper, "France needs order." And you almost believe him. Paris breathes a different kind of air now. Still smoky, still restless, but laced with a strange calm. You're standing in the year 1799, watching the dust settle after Napoleon's coup d'etat. The streets hum with rumor. The general has saved France. Others whisper, he's killed the revolution. But you can't deny the relief that ripples through the city. After a decade of terror, famine, and blood, the French people would trade 1,000 ideals for one good night's sleep. Napoleon calls it the consulate, a new form of government meant to restore order. On paper, it's a republic. In practice, you can feel the walls tightening around one man's authority. There are 3 consuls, technically, but only one voice that matters. When Napoleon speaks, everyone else just nods like a metronome. He starts with the illusion of humility. "Citizens," he says, "the revolution is over." And for a moment, you almost believe him. He sets up a new constitution, the Constitution of the Year 8, and makes himself first consul for 10 years. The people vote to approve it by referendum. The result? A ridiculous landslide. It's hard to lose when you count the ballots yourself. Historians still argue whether this was genuine popular support or clever manipulation. Maybe both. The French, weary from chaos, long for a strong hand. Napoleon offers exactly that. You follow him into his office in the Tuileries Palace. Papers are stacked like miniature fortresses, each a decree, a reform, a new idea. He barely sleeps, 3, maybe 4 hours a night, dictating to secretaries, drawing maps, sketching codes. When he paces, the floorboards creak like a ticking clock. He's reorganizing France from top to bottom. Central administration, tax collection, education, even the calendar. He restores the church, not out of faith, but pragmatism. Men are ruled by 2 things, he says, their interests and their beliefs. So he cuts a deal with the Pope, the Concordat of 1801, reconciling France with Catholicism without surrendering control. Priests return, but they serve the state as much as God. It's genius or blasphemy, depending on who you ask. Outside, the streets grow orderly again. Bread is cheaper, crime drops, industry hums. You walk through the markets and hear people say, "At last, someone's in charge." They don't care if he's a dictator, as long as he's an efficient one. And oh, is he efficient. When he isn't governing, he's campaigning. His mind leaps from law to logistics to war plans without missing a beat. It's 1800 now, and France's enemies are circling again. Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia. The revolution may be over, but the wars aren't. Napoleon decides to strike before they do. You find yourself trudging through snow in the Alps, following him on a seemingly impossible march. The air burns your lungs, and the soldiers slip on the frozen path, dragging cannons by hand. Somewhere up ahead, Napoleon rides his mule. Yes, mule, not the heroic stallion from the paintings. The artist Jacques-Louis David would later upgrade the animal in his portrait, making it a rearing white horse instead. Reality was humbler, colder, and smelled a lot more like wet wool. When the army bursts into Italy, the Austrians are stunned. At Marengo, a small town on a flat plain, the French nearly lose everything. You watch the lines falter, men panic, and Napoleon's hat vanish in the smoke. But then, at the last desperate moment, reinforcements arrive and the tide turns. The Austrians retreat. The French win, barely. Marengo becomes legend the moment the consulate is secured by cannon fire. France, once again, bows to its savior. You can almost feel the thrill radiating through him as he rides into Milan. A victory so close to disaster, it's the kind of risk that feeds his soul. Back in Paris, the propaganda machine spins faster than any printing press. Newspapers hail him as the man of destiny. Plays and poems glorify him. Even fashion joins the cult. Women wear their hair à la victime or à la Napoleon, depending on which side of history they think they're on. But behind the scenes, something shifts. Napoleon grows more comfortable with power, less with compromise. He replaces elections with appointments, debates with decrees. Critics vanish, politely, efficiently, sometimes permanently. The consulate that began as a republic is slowly curving into monarchy. One evening, as you stroll through the candlelit corridors of the Tuileries, you overhear him murmuring to his brother Joseph, "Power is my mistress. I have worked too hard to let her go." You realize then, he doesn't just want to govern France, he wants to embody it. In 1802, another plebiscite sweeps through the country. Napoleon is declared first consul for life. The applause is deafening. The results are, again, miraculously unanimous. Even the skeptics are too exhausted to resist. "Better one despot than 100 incompetents," you hear someone mutter at a cafe. The revolution's ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, now feel like souvenirs from a distant past. Still, he isn't done remaking the world. He founds the Bank of France to stabilize the economy. He orders the codification of laws into a single, clear system, the Napoleonic Code, that will outlive him and influence countries from Belgium to Brazil. Even his enemies later admit the code is his true masterpiece. And yet, irony always follows genius like a shadow. The same man who abolished privilege now builds an aristocracy of his own. Titles, medals, grand marshals, all loyal to him. You can't help but smirk when he says, "I make my generals kings, but they remain my soldiers." It's both a joke and a warning. Historians still argue whether Napoleon genuinely believed he was serving the revolution, or simply using it as camouflage for ambition. Some paint him as a pragmatic idealist, a man trying to preserve freedom through order. Others see him as a chameleon tyrant who betrayed every principle he once defended. You stand in the middle, unsure which reflection the mirror shows tonight. By 1803, peace with Britain collapses. Ships clash in the Atlantic, spies slither through Paris, and Europe braces for another storm. Napoleon's empire is still unborn, but you can already feel it kicking inside the womb of history. One night he gathers his advisors. Maps unfurl across the table. Rivers, mountains, red lines sweeping across Europe like veins. To secure France, he says, we must secure the continent. The men nod. The logic is flawless and terrifying. Expansion becomes survival. Conquest becomes destiny. You picture him pacing, candlelight flickering on his face, his hand tucked inside his uniform. Not a pose for painters, but a habit from stomach ulcers. Turns out even emperors get indigestion. The machine starts turning. Troops drilling in the fields. Ships assembling at Boulogne. Engineers building roads to nowhere yet. You feel the momentum, unstoppable and intoxicating. France, once a chaotic republic, now moves like a single organism. Its pulse set by one man's heartbeat. But deep down, you sense what he doesn't. The higher he climbs, the thinner the air. Power, like altitude, makes men dizzy. And the next step he takes, well, it won't just make him ruler of France. It'll make him legend and liability in the same breath. Because soon, he won't just lead a republic. He'll crown himself emperor. The air inside Notre Dame Cathedral hangs heavy with incense and gold dust. It's December 2nd, 1804, and the organ thunders as you stand among diplomats, nobles, generals, and bishops, each pretending not to be terrified of what's about to happen. The Pope himself, Pius VII, sits waiting at the altar, his face carved from centuries of compromise. You glance toward the center aisle, and there he is, Napoleon Bonaparte. 35 years old, dressed in white satin and crimson velvet, laurel crown gleaming like a Roman coin. Josephine glides beside him, radiant and trembling, wrapped in diamonds. The crowd is silent as the ceremony begins. The Pope lifts the crown to bless it, as custom dictates. But then, Napoleon turns, takes it from the old man's hands, and places it on his own head. A gasp ripples through the cathedral like a breeze through dry grass. Only Napoleon crowns Napoleon, he might as well have said aloud. You can't help but smirk. Subtlety was never his thing. In that single gesture, he rewrites the script of monarchy. He's no divine right king. He's self-made divinity. Historians still argue whether it was theatrical arrogance or calculated symbolism. Either way, the message lands. The revolution may be dead, but its energy now wears imperial robes. France erupts in pageantry. Paris hosts parades that last for days, fountains run with wine, and medals clink on every chest within reach of a tailor. But beneath the fireworks lies something deeper, a quiet awe. The son of a minor Corsican noble has become emperor of the French. You imagine every old aristocrat from the Ancien regime shifting uneasily in their graves. At first glance, the coronation feels like betrayal, a republic reborn as empire. But Napoleon sells it as protection. I am the revolution, he declares. I am its sword and its shield. And the people, weary of instability, believe him. He promises efficiency, prosperity, and glory. It's the oldest sales pitch in history. Trust me, I've got this. As emperor, he wastes no time proving it. You trail him through the vast corridors of the Tuileries, now polished to mirror shine. Ministers scurry like clockwork mice, each armed with ledgers and nervous smiles. Napoleon juggles a dozen conversations at once. Taxation here, education there, a new legal decree somewhere else. He dictates faster than his secretaries can write. He revives France's economy through infrastructure, roads, bridges, canals, and boosts manufacturing. The guild system? Gone. Meritocracy? Installed. You can almost taste the efficiency. Bitter, but exhilarating. Civil servants are promoted by talent, not lineage. He founds the lycées, state-run schools that turn peasant sons into bureaucrats, engineers, and officers. An army, he says, must march on its stomach, but a nation marches on its schools. Of course, there's a joke among the officials. In Napoleon's France, there are two kinds of people, those who work for him and those who don't work for long. Still, there's a peculiar contradiction at the heart of it all. He abolishes privilege but builds a new nobility, awarding titles like Prince of the Empire or Duke of Dalmatia. The irony doesn't escape you. Ah yes, you mutter, the revolution of equals, now with 100% more emperors. But while France reorganizes itself, Europe watches nervously. Monarchs across the continent feel their crowns grow heavier. Napoleon's rise is a contagious idea, proof that birthright can be replaced by brilliance, that old empires can be redesigned with mathematics and bayonets. Britain, naturally, can't let that stand. The two powers are locked in an ideological duel: liberty of the seas versus domination of the land. In 1803, war reignites. You hear the drums in Dover and the bugles in Boulogne as both sides prepare for invasion. Napoleon amasses an army of 200,000 men along the Channel, his Grande Armée, sleek and disciplined, their tents stretching to the horizon. He names every regiment personally, inspects the artillery, and even eats with the soldiers to show solidarity. One night, by the fire, a grenadier nervously offers him a piece of bread. Napoleon accepts, eats half, and tosses the rest into the flames. "You can't rule the world if you fear hunger," he says softly. You don't know whether to laugh or take notes, but the invasion of Britain never comes. The Royal Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, rules the waves. When Napoleon's fleet meets Nelson's at Trafalgar in 1805, the sea turns into a graveyard of French masts. You stand on the deck of a surviving ship, watching the tricolor sink beneath gray foam. "England will be mistress of the seas," Napoleon admits later, "but I shall be master of the land." And he means it. The real prize is not across the Channel, it's across the Rhine. Austria, Russia, and Sweden form the third coalition to stop him, so he pivots east, fast as lightning. You follow him as he crosses Germany, moving armies with mechanical precision. The Grande Armée moves 20 miles a day, living off the land, guided by a single brain, his. In December 1805, near the town of Austerlitz, the stage is set. The Allied army, Austrians and Russians, outnumbers him almost 2-1. The night before battle, the emperor walks among his troops, cloak wrapped tight against the cold. He speaks softly, promising victory. Someone starts singing, Veillons au salut de l'Empire, and soon the whole army hums it like a lullaby. At dawn, fog cloaks the valley. You can barely see your own hands. Napoleon's plan is a masterpiece. Pretend weakness, lure the enemy to attack his right flank, then crush them with a counterstroke from the center. When the sun finally pierces the mist, the son of Austerlitz, they'll call it, the trap snaps shut. Cavalry thunder, cannons flash, bayonets gleam. You smell burnt powder and hear the screams of men who moments ago were cheering. Within hours, the Allied army disintegrates. Thousands drown in frozen lakes as French artillery shatters the ice beneath them. One sharp blow, Napoleon says later, and the coalition was destroyed. Historians still argue whether Austerlitz was his greatest triumph or simply his luckiest day. Either way, Europe trembles. Austria sues for peace, Russia retreats, and the Holy Roman Empire, alive since Charlemagne, is dissolved. Napoleon redraws the map like a child, rearranging toy blocks. You watch him in Vienna, standing before the defeated Emperor Francis II. The room smells of ink, sweat, and humiliation. Napoleon doesn't gloat. He simply dictates terms. Territories ceded, armies reduced, tributes paid. Then he walks out, humming. "The map of Europe," he says to you, "is my chessboard." Back in Paris, the news sparks delirium. Crowds chant his name, plays are written, medals struck, babies named Napoleon. Even his critics fall silent for a time. You can feel it, the sensation of invincibility, the illusion that the man has cracked the code of history. But even in triumph, shadows gather. In the salons, whispers begin. Can any mortal sustain this pace? Ministers grow cautious, generals ambitious. Josephine, unable to bear him an heir, feels the cold edge of his ambition. He loves her in his way, but love has always been a luxury he can't afford. One evening, you find him alone in his study, candle burning low, letters from the front scattered like snowflakes. "I have become the state," he murmurs, almost to himself, but the state must never sleep. You notice his hands twitch slightly. Signs of exhaustion, maybe loneliness, or maybe it's just the toll of carrying a continent on his shoulders. He has turned France into the most efficient war machine on Earth. But machines have no souls, and even emperors need rest. You catch yourself wondering if he knows what he's created. The revolution promised liberty. Napoleon delivered order. The people traded chaos for discipline, and they got exactly what they asked for, just not in the way they imagined. As you drift from the palace that night, the streets of Paris gleam with rain and candlelight. You hear soldiers laughing in cafes, carriages clattering over cobblestones, and somewhere, far away, a printing press hammering out fresh proclamations of victory. For now, the empire shines. For now, the world believes in the man who crowned himself. But you know how stories like this go. Power is a staircase that never ends. And one day, even Napoleon will find there's no higher step, only the long, echoing fall back down. You're trudging across the cold plains of Central Europe now, boots slick with mud, the air sharp enough to slice through your coat. It's 1805. Austerlitz is already legend, but Napoleon isn't slowing down. He doesn't know how. Victory is addictive, and France has become drunk on its emperor's brilliance. The Grande Armée, his pride and obsession, swells to nearly 500,000 men. You march beside them, infantry in perfect formation, cavalry horses snorting clouds of steam, cannons creaking like groaning beasts. It's not an army anymore. It's a moving civilization. Every step forward means another town's bells ring in surrender. You can almost feel the earth trembling beneath the synchronized beat of boots and drums. And Napoleon? He's everywhere. He rides ahead to scout terrain, inspects rations, memorizes river crossings. He remembers soldiers' names, asks after their families, jokes about their blisters. Men are led by toys, he once said, flicking a medal in his hand. Maybe he's right, because even starving, frost-bitten soldiers would follow him into hell. Some already have. Still, he's no fool. He knows that empire isn't built on emotion alone. It runs on logistics. Every loaf of bread, every musket ball, every horseshoe is part of a greater equation. Napoleon once called war a business of numbers, and he runs it like an accountant with cannons. Historians still argue whether he was a visionary or simply the most efficient administrator ever to pick up a sword. You suspect the truth sits somewhere between genius and madness. The map of Europe is his personal sandbox now. After the triumph at Austerlitz, He dissolves the Holy Roman Empire, replaces it with the Confederation of the Rhine, and installs friendly kings across the region. Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg all get shiny upgrades in exchange for loyalty to the new French order. You wander through these new client states, where French officials teach locals how to be efficient, modern, and properly Napoleonic. It's not all tyranny. In some places, peasants cheer him. The Napoleonic Code abolishes serfdom, introduces equality before the law, and tears down feudal privileges. "I bring civilization," Napoleon insists, and sometimes it's true. But the price of civilization is always paid in someone else's blood. Across the Channel, Britain remains defiant, pouring gold into any coalition willing to fight France. The Austrians, Russians, and Prussians lick their wounds, but soon the drums roll again. Napoleon's energy is contagious. His victories rewrite the very concept of warfare. He divides his army into corps, each capable of independent action, a modular design centuries ahead of its time. Battles become chess matches played at lightning speed. And then, in 1806, comes the duel he's been waiting for, the War of the Fourth Coalition. Prussia, proud and rigid, challenges France, convinced its disciplined soldiers will humble this Corsican upstart. You almost pity them. The Prussians march with slow precision, banners snapping in the wind. Napoleon's army moves like smoke, appearing, disappearing, reappearing behind enemy lines. Within days, the Prussian king realizes he's been outmaneuvered. The Battle of Jena-Auerstedt becomes a slaughter. You watch the French cavalry sweep through like a tidal wave. Even Napoleon is shocked by how quickly the old Prussian machine collapses. Berlin falls. You walk its empty boulevards, littered with abandoned muskets and torn uniforms. In the royal palace, Napoleon picks up Frederick the Great's sword, studies it, and murmurs, "He wouldn't have lost to me." You can't tell if it's admiration or mockery. Probably both. Prussia is humiliated. Russia vows revenge. The Emperor of France now stands at the peak of his power, ruling, or influencing, almost every inch of Europe except Britain, Sweden, and the frozen north. The Treaty of Tilsit in 1807 seals the deal. You're there, on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, as Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I meet like two schoolboys comparing toys. The setting is absurdly theatrical. Gilded tents, velvet chairs, and guards lined up like statues. "Europe," Napoleon says with a grin, "is too small for both of us. Let's divide it." Alexander, captivated by the Corsican's charm, agrees, for now. You feel the uneasy handshake vibrate through history. Then comes one of those odd little moments history nearly forgets. Napoleon, while inspecting troops in Poland, slips on ice and falls flat on his back. The soldiers gasp. He jumps up, brushes off the snow, and growls, "That's a sign of victory." They cheer anyway. You can't help but laugh. Even the universe can't trip him without becoming part of his legend. But victory has its own gravity, and every empire eventually becomes a black hole. After Tilsit, Napoleon's conquests grow heavier, slower. He meddles in Spain, interferes in the Ottoman Empire, demands more men, more gold, more everything. The Grande Armée starts to creak under its own brilliance. Still, for a while, everything he touches turns to marble. The French economy booms. Roads stretch like veins across Europe. Artists paint him as a modern Caesar. Scholars compare him to Alexander the Great. The very word Napoleonic becomes shorthand for excellence and danger. And yet, in his private life, the cracks deepen. Josephine, unable to produce an heir, watches him grow distant. You see it in his eyes during dinners, how his gaze drifts past her to maps and reports and dreams of dynasties yet unborn. In 1810, he divorces her, tears brimming in both eyes, then marries Marie-Louise of Austria, a teenager and daughter of his former enemy. Politics disguised as romance, as usual. Paris celebrates again, but this time the applause feels forced. He's marrying an empire, someone jokes at a salon. Maybe that's true. Maybe it always was. Soon after, a son is born, Napoleon II, the King of Rome. For the first time, you see him soften, almost human. He visits the nursery daily, cooing at the baby. "He will finish what I began," he whispers. History, however, has other plans. By 1811, France is vast, rich, and restless. The empire stretches from Lisbon to Warsaw, but Napoleon's hunger hasn't dimmed. "Europe must be one," he declares, "under French law, French commerce, and French spirit." You want to ask him, and what about freedom? But he's long since replaced philosophy with logistics. Meanwhile, Britain strangles his economy through naval blockades, and smuggling thrives despite his decrees. The continental system, designed to starve Britain of trade, begins to choke his own allies instead. Merchants curse his name. Economies stumble. Even his generals mutter behind closed doors. Historians still argue whether his ambition was genius or delusion, whether he sought unity or control. What's certain is that his reach has grown faster than his grasp. Every victory plants the seed of the next rebellion. You walk through Paris one last time before the next campaign. Posters show Napoleon as Jupiter, thunderbolt in hand, protector of civilization. Children play soldier in the streets, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" You wonder how many of them will be marching into Russia next year, and how many will never march back. But tonight, he stands at his palace window, watching the Seine shimmer under the moon. The city sleeps, unaware that the greatest gamble in military history is already turning in his mind. He says softly, to you, or maybe to himself, "Europe is a body. I am its heart." And you think, he might be right, but even hearts can burst. Because the next time he moves his armies, they'll march not toward triumph, but toward the frozen gates of hell. You wake to the hum of Europe reshaped. The year is 1808, and the continent no longer looks like a map. It looks like a mosaic stamped with Napoleon's initials. From Amsterdam to Warsaw, you can't throw a stone without hitting a relative of the emperor who's suddenly become a king. You wander through this new order, feeling both awe and unease. His brothers Joseph, Louis, and Jerome now rule Naples, Holland, and Westphalia. His sisters sit on thrones draped in borrowed silk. Each court copies the Parisian style, the pomp, the etiquette, the smell of perfume masking the scent of gunpowder. And everywhere, the tricolor flies. This is the Napoleonic vision, not just an empire of conquest, but an empire of ideas. You stroll past law courts where clerks recite the Napoleonic Code, that neat, logical bundle of rules abolishing feudalism, guaranteeing property rights, and declaring that careers are open to talent. It's enlightenment dressed in a uniform. Equality before the law, he proclaims, and though the phrase shines like polished brass, you can't help noticing the fine print, except for women and anyone who challenges him. Still, for ordinary Europeans, it's intoxicating. In German states, serfs become citizens. In Italy, Jews gain rights they'd never had before. Streets are renamed, schools opened, borders redrawn. Historians still argue whether Napoleon was Europe's greatest modernizer or merely its most persuasive colonizer. You suspect both are true. He believes he's spreading order, but order is never neutral. Behind every new constitution stands a French garrison. Behind every promise of liberty stands a tax collector. And behind every brother king stands a Corsican hand pulling the strings. Then, like a crack in fine porcelain, comes Spain. It begins quietly. In 1808, Napoleon summons the Spanish royal family to France under the pretext of mediation. Their country is rotting from incompetence and intrigue. Once they cross the border, he simply doesn't let them go back. You blink, half in disbelief. The Bourbon dynasty abdicates under pressure, and Napoleon installs his brother Joseph as king. A family matter, he calls it. The Spanish call it treason. The invasion that follows feels different from any before. You smell smoke long before you reach Madrid. Spanish priests ring church bells, not for mass, but for war. Farmers and monks grab pitchforks and flintlocks. The Peninsular War begins, and it's ugly from the first shot. You march with the French troops through narrow mountain passes and endless olive groves. The heat is suffocating. The locals hostile. Villages that seem empty by day erupt at night with ambushes. The word guerrilla, little war, is born here, and it's not poetic. It's dirty, improvised, merciless. A French soldier drinks from a well and collapses moments later, poisoned. A wagon train vanishes into the hills, never seen again. They fight like devils and melt like smoke, one officer mutters. You believe him. The Spanish know every stone, every shadow. The French know only exhaustion. Worse, the British arrive, led by a calm, deliberate man named Arthur Wellesley, soon to be known as the Duke of Wellington. You watch his redcoats land in Portugal, disciplined and unflinching. They move cautiously, strike precisely, and never give him the kind of battle he wants. Napoleon himself storms into Spain to fix things, and for a moment, it works. In one dazzling campaign, he drives the British back toward the coast. Madrid falls, and Joseph returns to his unwanted throne. But the emperor can't stay. The rest of Europe still trembles, and he must keep it that way. He leaves the occupation to his marshals, who learn too late that this war isn't about lines and maneuvers. It's about patience and hatred. You see it in their eyes. The veterans of Austerlitz now haunted by shadows in the vineyards. No clear fronts, no glorious charges, just endless skirmishes, snipers, and ambushes. The Spanish call their country a wolf's den, and they're not wrong. Back in Paris, Napoleon tries to ignore the bleeding wound in Iberia. It's a sideshow, he says, but the truth seeps into every report, every casualty list. The Peninsular War becomes his ulcer, slow, constant, incurable. And yet, while Spain burns, the emperor builds. You stroll through Paris, dazzled by the transformation. New bridges cross the Seine, new monuments rise, and new bureaucracies hum like clockwork. The University of France oversees every school, from village to capital. Civil servants wear uniforms. The post runs on time. Even his police, led by the meticulous Joseph Fouché, manage to make surveillance look elegant. Everywhere, you hear the same phrase, the emperor knows. Whether it's a missing shipment of grain or a mayor caught taking bribes, the myth persists that Napoleon sees everything. The man hardly sleeps, dictating letters to multiple secretaries at once, his mind darting from artillery ranges to the price of wheat. If you want something done well, he once said, do it yourself. France takes him at his word, but with order comes control. Newspapers are censored, dissenters vanish. The once free press of the revolution shrinks to a few obedient gazettes. Even art bends to his will. Painters like David immortalize him in heroic poses. Generals kneel like apostles, and the empire becomes a religion with one saint, Napoleon himself. Still, there's brilliance in the tyranny. He introduces the metric system across the continent. He creates prefects, the efficient middle managers who keep every province in line. He funds canals, roads, hospitals, even orphanages. For every soldier lost abroad, a bureaucrat back home is inventing modern France. One afternoon, you find him pacing in his study, maps spread before him like constellations. Europe is a house, he muses, but it has too many doors. You glance down. Those doors are named Prussia, Austria, and Russia. He's planning again. The wars never truly end. They just pause to reload. In 1809, Austria, nursing its pride after Austerlitz, rises again. Napoleon meets them at Aspern-Essling, near Vienna. For the first time in years, he bleeds. The Danube floods, bridges collapse, entire regiments drown. He retreats, a rare humiliating word in his vocabulary. But weeks later, at Wagram, he redeems himself with brutal efficiency. The Austrian army breaks, Vienna falls, and the map bends once more. Victory, yes, but not the same kind. You can feel fatigue seeping into his empire like damp through stone. France is winning, but it's tired of winning. The cemeteries fill faster than the coffers. Even his allies start flinching at the word conscription. In his triumphal speech to the legislature, Napoleon assures them, peace is near. You almost laugh. Peace is always near, just beyond the next campaign. Yet there's something noble, almost tragic, in his conviction. He truly believes he's reshaping the world for the better. I found Europe in chaos, he says, and I leave it organized. He doesn't add that it's organized mostly around him. You step outside the glittering capital, into a Europe both awed and anxious. From Warsaw to Lisbon, statues of Napoleon rise faster than crops. Children in classrooms recite his maxims. But the empire's heartbeat is irregular now, skipping in Spain, faltering in the east, and somewhere beyond the horizon, in the vast, frozen expanse of Russia, a different emperor waits, smiling. The morning smells of gunpowder and oranges. You're standing on a dusty hill in Spain, watching the sunrise bleed across a landscape that's seen too much war. The cicadas buzz, the church bells toll faintly in the distance, and the once proud banners of the French army hang limp with dust. It's 1810, and what was supposed to be a swift campaign of liberation has curdled into a nightmare without end. You can almost feel the exhaustion radiating from the French ranks. The men are gaunt, their boots splitting at the seams. They've fought 1,000 skirmishes, but gained nothing that lasts. Each town captured by day turns hostile again by night. Even the horses seem to flinch at the shadows. The Peninsular War is supposed to prove that France can remake Spain in Napoleon's image. Orderly, modern, rational. Instead, it proves the limits of his power. The guerrillas have turned the countryside into a maze of invisible knives. Every patrol risks being swallowed by it. One captain mutters to you, "They don't fight for pay, they fight for home." That's the worst kind. The emperor's marshals, Ney, Soult, Massena, are the best soldiers in Europe, but none can solve this puzzle. Spain is a cancer, Napoleon growls from Paris, but it's a cancer of his own making. His brother Joseph sits miserably in Madrid, more prisoner than king, surrounded by courtiers who know they're hated. You wander through the burned villages and ruined abbeys, through markets that sell nothing but dust. A priest spits as you pass. A child throws a stone. It clinks harmlessly off your boot, but it says more than any musket. The empire, for all its grandeur, has become an unwelcome guest. Back in Paris, however, the illusion of triumph continues. Napoleon still throws parades, still erects monuments. The news from Spain arrives filtered and perfumed. His ministers whisper only what he wants to hear. The situation is stable, they insist. Stable, like a powder keg before the spark. To distract the public, he pours energy into domestic reform. You step with him through the halls of the Lycée, where students in blue coats recite Latin declensions under portraits of Caesar and Bonaparte alike. His goal is clear: to raise generations who think like soldiers and administrators, disciplined, analytical, loyal. He reorganizes the administration into prefectures, each a mirror of his will. The state becomes a pyramid with Napoleon at the apex, seeing all, directing all. Civil servants call him le patron, the boss. You can hear the pride and the fear in their voices. Even religion bends under his architecture of control. After the concordat with the Pope, he regulates the church the way he regulates armies. Bishops appointed by the state, sermons vetted for loyalty. "I do not want priests," he says once. I want moral policemen. You almost choke on the audacity, but it works. France becomes a clockwork organism ticking to the rhythm of his command. And yet, something's off. The man who once rode through battlefields, crackling with inspiration, now seems wrapped in paperwork. His mornings start before dawn. His evenings end past midnight. He eats fast, sleeps little, trusts no one completely. The energy that once built Europe now seems to feed on him. Historians still argue whether this period marks the peak or the beginning of the fall. From a distance, it looks like perfection. An empire stable, prosperous, disciplined. But perfection is brittle. He senses the brittleness too. "My enemies are multiplying," he mutters, pacing before a map. Britain's blockade continues to choke French trade. Smugglers flood the coasts, and neutral nations simmer with resentment over his economic war. And then there's Russia, vast, proud, and growing restless under the weight of his continental system. When Tsar Alexander signed the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, he was half bewitched by Napoleon. They called each other brothers, exchanged gifts, promised eternal friendship. But friendship between emperors ages faster than milk. Russia's economy suffers from the trade bans, and Alexander grows tired of being the junior partner in Europe's new order. By 1811, the alliance is ice. Napoleon can feel it in his bones, the slow shift of loyalty, the tension crackling like static. He writes letter after letter, trying to reason, to threaten, to charm. None work. Finally, he slams his fist on the map and says the words that doom him. "I will march to Moscow." You'd think he'd learned from Spain, but Napoleon's flaw isn't stupidity, it's overconfidence. Every success convinces him that the next will be inevitable. Preparation begins on a scale Europe has never seen. The Grande Armée swells to more than 500,000 men, French, Polish, Italian, German, Dutch. They come from every corner of the empire, a babel of accents united by fear and loyalty. You stand among them as they drill, the earth trembling under synchronized steps. It feels less like an army and more like a force of nature. In the streets of Paris, people whisper, "Russia? That's madness. Didn't he say he wanted peace?" The newspapers print only optimism. Tailors sew new uniforms. Blacksmiths forge endless horseshoes. Bakers need extra loaves for a campaign that no one truly understands. Before leaving, he kisses his infant son on the forehead. "I go to secure your future," he tells Marie-Louise. She smiles, but her eyes betray her. You wonder if even she senses that this time, his luck won't hold. The march begins in June 1812. The soldiers sing, drums echoing through endless plains. The first weeks are easy. Villages surrender. The sun is bright, morale high. "We'll be in Moscow by autumn," they boast. You want to believe them. But soon the cracks appear. The distances are monstrous, the heat suffocating. Supply lines stretch thinner than string. Horses die by the thousands. Wagons sink in mud. Still, Napoleon presses on. His generals argue, but he waves them silent. "We must advance," he insists. To stop is death. By the time they reach Smolensk, the enemy still refuses to fight. The Russians retreat, burning everything behind them. Crops, villages, wells. Smoke blots out the sun. You ride through fields of ash where not even a dog remains. "They are defeating us without battle," one officer whispers. At last, near the small town of Borodino, the Russians make their stand. The battle that follows is a slaughterhouse. You watch cannonballs tear through ranks, smell cordite and blood mingling in the air. Napoleon wins, technically, but at a cost so high it feels like defeat. He surveys the carnage in silence, the ground soaked with 40,000 lives. "The most terrible of all my battles," he says quietly. And still, he pushes on. Moscow lies ahead, glittering like a mirage. When the French finally enter the city, it's almost empty. The wind howls through deserted streets. Curtains flutter in abandoned mansions. Then, as night falls, the fires start. Whether by accident or Russian design, the ancient capital ignites. You stand beside him as orange light devours the skyline. Flames leap from roof to roof, devouring palaces, cathedrals, history itself. Moscow burns for days. The soldiers loot what little remains. Discipline disintegrates. Napoleon waits for Alexander to negotiate peace. The Tsar never replies. Winter creeps in early. Snowflakes swirl through the ashes, and you feel the first cold whisper of doom. Back in Paris, they'll still call him the Emperor of Europe. But here, in the frozen heart of Russia, you can see the truth settling in behind his eyes. The dawning realization that even gods can overreach. He looks out at the burning city, his silhouette framed in the glow, and murmurs, "The Russians prefer to destroy their own capital than yield it to me." Then, after a pause, "Strange people." You want to tell him the truth, that he's the strange one, that he's built an empire too vast for a single heartbeat to sustain. But you stay silent, because the snow is falling harder now, and the drums are fading into the wind. Soon, the retreat will begin, and Europe will never be the same again. The air tastes of ash and frost. You can barely tell where the smoke ends and the snow begins. It's October 1812, and the city of Moscow, once shimmering with domes and music, has become a carcass of charred stone. The flames have finally died, leaving behind a silence so complete it presses against your eardrums. You're standing beside Napoleon, watching the last pillars of smoke curl into the sky like ghosts. He's waiting for peace, for surrender, for logic, but Russia offers none of these things. Alexander will come to his senses, he mutters for the 100th time, pacing the cracked marble floor of a half-burned palace. His coat is frayed at the cuffs, his boots coated in soot. The Emperor of Europe looks tired, smaller somehow, but his pride stands untouched. He cannot let his people freeze, Napoleon insists. You don't have the heart to tell him that Alexander already has. Every day, the message is the same. Silence. No envoys, no letters, no negotiations. The Tsar's answer is the wind howling through the ruins. Even the pigeons seem to have fled. Napoleon sends patrols out into the countryside to forage, but they return empty-handed, or not at all. The Russian peasants would rather torch their own barns than feed an invader. Historians still argue why he stayed as long as he did. Some say arrogance, others paralysis. Maybe he simply couldn't admit that for the first time in his life, the world refused to move to his rhythm. You can see the tension in his jaw, the restless tapping of his fingers. A month, he says. Just one more month. But winter doesn't wait. The first frost hardens the ground, turning mud to glass. Horses slip, wagons splinter. The soldiers begin to die, not from bullets, but from hunger, cold, and despair. They tear up floorboards to burn for heat, melt snow for water, eat whatever leather they can find. You walk past a campfire where men are roasting strips of saddle. The smell is sour, metallic, unforgettable. When Napoleon finally gives the order to retreat, it's already too late. The army that entered Russia with 600,000 men now limps westward, half dead, hounded by Cossacks. The temperature plunges below -20 degrees Celsius. Muskets freeze, fingers blacken, eyelids crust with ice. You watch soldiers collapse mid-step, too weak to rise. There's one haunting scene you'll never forget. A bridge over the Berezina River, November 1812. The crossing is chaos. Two narrow pontoons jammed with men, horses, wagons, wounded. The Russians shell from afar, cannonballs smashing into the ice. Screams mix with the crack of muskets and the crash of frozen wood. Some men throw themselves into the river rather than burn. You can taste the gunpowder and fear. Napoleon, grim and silent, directs the crossing personally. His coat is wrapped tight, his face pale as marble. When his aides beg him to flee first, he refuses. The emperor leaves last. For once, he means it. By the time the survivors stagger out of Russia, the Grande Armée is gone. Less an army than a ghost story. Of the 500,000 who crossed the Niemen, barely 50,000 return in any form that can still walk or speak. Horses are replaced by donkeys, cannons by sticks. They don't march anymore, they crawl. You trudge beside them, boots shredded, breath like smoke. For all the grandeur of his empire, Napoleon's world has shrunk to one idea: survival. When he finally reaches Paris, he tries to pretend nothing has changed. He drafts new decrees, summons fresh troops, and spins the disaster as a strategic withdrawal. His words sound hollow in the echoing halls of the Tuileries. Even his closest allies avoid eye contact. And yet, somehow, the man refuses to collapse. Fortune, he says, is a woman. The moment you show weakness, she leaves you. So he pretends to be strong, and in doing so, becomes strong again. Europe, however, smells blood. The empires of old, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, sense that the god of war is mortal after all. They rally faster than he can rebuild. The Sixth Coalition forms in 1813, determined to crush him once and for all. You watch France call up boys barely old enough to shave. They wear oversized uniforms and carry muskets longer than their arms. Napoleon calls them "my children." You wonder if he believes that or just needs to. Then in the spring of 1813, he returns to Germany. The speed is gone, but the brilliance isn't. At Lutzen and Bautzen, he wins again. Victories carved out of sheer stubbornness. But the price is ruinous. His marshals are tired, his cavalry nearly extinct, his ammunition low. And his enemies? They learn. They adapt. They don't fight his kind of war anymore. By October, near the city of Leipzig, it all comes to a head. They'll call it the Battle of Nations, and standing there, you understand why. Frenchmen face Russians, Austrians, Prussians, Swedes, even Germans once loyal to Napoleon. It's as if the continent itself has turned against him. You're there as the cannons roar for 4 days straight. Smoke blots out the sun. The ground quakes beneath endless columns of men. The smell of sulfur is thick enough to taste. At one point, a bridge is blown too early, trapping 30,000 French soldiers on the wrong side of the river. They're cut down or captured while Napoleon watches, frozen, unable to change it. When it's over, the emperor rides away in silence. His army is shattered, his allies gone, his dream bleeding out on the Saxon mud. The myth of invincibility, once his sharpest weapon, has finally broken. Back in Paris, even the loyal begin to doubt. Propaganda can't hide the funerals, the shortages, the whispers. He's lost his star, an old veteran mutters in a tavern. Another replies, maybe the star just fell into snow. Still, Napoleon refuses to surrender. He retreats into strategy, sketches new campaigns, drafts endless plans. He believes France can be saved through one last miracle. But miracles, like empires, have limits. Meanwhile, his enemies march west, slow, steady, relentless. In early 1814, the Allied armies cross into France itself. For the first time since the Revolution, the war is at home. You follow him as he rides through familiar fields, now battlefields. Villagers watch silently from doorways, unsure whether to cheer or curse. Even cornered, he fights like a wounded lion. The campaign of France becomes a grim masterpiece. Napoleon winning small battles against impossible odds, retreating just enough to strike again. At Montereau and Champaubert, he outmaneuvers armies twice his size. They will learn, he says, eyes blazing, that I am still Napoleon. But there are too many, and time itself seems against him. Paris, the heart of his empire, is surrounded. The government panics. His marshals plead with him to accept peace. He refuses. If I must fall, he says, I will fall like a thunderbolt. One evening, word arrives. Paris has surrendered. Josephine's old home city, the cradle of his power, has opened its gates to the enemy. He reads the news in silence, then sets the letter down. So it ends, he whispers. He retreats to Fontainebleau, that sprawling palace of marble corridors and fading echoes. There, surrounded by the ghosts of his victories, he calls his marshals together and tries one last time to rally them. But you can see the truth in their faces. They're done. They want peace, family, rest. They love him, but not enough to die again. Finally, on April 6, 1814, Napoleon signs his abdication. The pen scratches across the page like a bayonet through silk. "My political life is finished," he says, "but my glory will not fade." You watch as he steps onto the carriage that will take him into exile. The once invincible conqueror now rides through fields blooming with spring, past peasants who barely look up. He's being sent to Elba, a tiny island off the Italian coast, with a token guard and the hollow title of Emperor. As the wheels creak into the distance, you realize something strange. He isn't broken. Not yet. There's a faint smile playing at his lips, a look of someone already planning the impossible. Because if history has taught you anything, it's this: Napoleon Bonaparte never stays still for long. The sea is calm the morning you arrive at Elba, a green and golden speck adrift in the Mediterranean. For the first time in 20 years, there are no trumpets, no cannon salutes, no soldiers chanting his name. Only gulls, the splash of oars, and a weary silence. You stand on the dock beside Napoleon as he steps onto the island that will be his cage. His uniform is immaculate, but the gesture feels theatrical, like an actor refusing to leave the stage after the curtain has already fallen. "This is my empire now," he says dryly, gesturing at the hills and olive trees. You can't tell if it's a joke or a warning. He's been given the title of Emperor of Elba, a handful of ships, and a tiny army of 600 men. Europe congratulates itself. The ogre is chained, France is pacified, peace has returned. But you can see in his eyes that he's already calculating. Elba may be small, but it's still a stage, and Napoleon has never been good at staying backstage. The people of the island, poor fishermen and farmers, gather to see him. Some bow, unsure of the etiquette for greeting a fallen god. He greets them in Italian, praises their olives, promises roads, schools, and prosperity. Within a month, he's reorganized the postal system, repaired the mines, and started draining marshlands. It's absurd. He governs exile like it's an empire. Every morning, he rises before dawn, inspects the harbor, drills his little guard, and dictates letters. To live, he says to you one day, is to act. And act he does. He throws parties, receives guests, even hosts concerts. The locals adore him. He walks through the markets shaking hands, buying fruit, laughing like a man without regrets. But when night falls, the mask slips. You catch him alone sometimes, staring at the dark sea that separates him from France. He paces like a caged tiger, muttering to himself. The newspapers from the mainland arrive irregularly, but he devours every one, reading between the lines. The new Bourbon king, Louis XVIII, is already unpopular. The French army is restless, unpaid, humiliated. The revolution's veterans grumble about royal arrogance. You can feel the shift. The old order Napoleon once destroyed is stumbling again, and the people remember who made them great. Historians still debate whether his return was planned from the start or born of impulse. The truth is simpler. Napoleon cannot exist without movement. He's not designed for retirement, not built for stillness. So when word reaches him that Louis' soldiers are demoralized and that the Allies are distracted with their victory celebrations, he sees his chance. "They have learned nothing," he says quietly, "and forgotten nothing." On February 26, 1815, he gathers his guard on the beach. The wind whips through their tattered flags as they load supplies onto a small flotilla of ships. He wears his old gray coat, the same one from Austerlitz. "We are going home," he announces. A few men weep. The islanders wave as he sails away, not sure whether they're witnessing madness or destiny. The voyage is perilous. British patrols scour the Mediterranean. But luck, that old companion, hasn't deserted him yet. After 6 days at sea, the coast of France appears through the mist. He lands near Cannes, kisses the soil, and whispers, "France, I have returned to save you once more." There's no fanfare, no army waiting, just a handful of loyal veterans and a dream that shouldn't work. Yet somehow, it does. As he marches north, village by village, his force grows. Soldiers sent to arrest him lower their muskets. At one encounter near Grenoble, he steps forward alone, opens his coat and shouts, "Soldiers, if there is one among you who would kill his emperor, here I stand." The silence lasts only a second before it breaks into cheers. The line collapses into chaos. Men rush to him, crying, "Vive l'Empereur!" You feel the electricity surge through the air. It's not politics anymore. It's faith. By the time he reaches Lyon, the army sent to stop him has joined him. The king flees Paris without a fight. Less than 3 weeks after landing with a few hundred men, Napoleon Bonaparte reclaims the throne of France. They'll call it the 100 Days, and you can feel why. It burns fast, bright, and doomed from the start. Back in Paris, the city greets him like a lover returning from war. Crowds chant his name, hats fly into the air, women throw flowers into the streets. He addresses the Chamber of Deputies with his old fire. "I come not as a conqueror, but as a citizen. I will end war and give France peace with honor." You almost believe him. Maybe he believes it too, but Europe doesn't. The moment news reaches Vienna, where the victors of the last war are busy carving up the continent, panic spreads. Kings and emperors drop their wine glasses in unison. The word Napoleon sends them scrambling back to their armies. Within weeks, the 7th Coalition forms. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, all united again to finish what they started. They don't bother with diplomacy this time. The terms are simple: defeat him or die trying. Napoleon knows it. "If I must fight," he says, "I will strike first." His genius, though tarnished, ignites again. In months, he rebuilds the French army. Infantry, cavalry, artillery, pulled from veterans and conscripts alike. The old spirit is still there, one general whispers as he watches recruits drilling in the rain. They just need him to breathe it back into them. He moves quickly, marching toward Belgium to separate the British under Wellington from the Prussians under Blücher before they can unite. His plan is elegant, precise, and impossibly risky. It's vintage Napoleon, one last gamble to outthink the entire world. As the campaign begins in June 1815, you feel the weight of history pressing close. France's roads are muddy with summer rain, the skies brooding with thunder. The soldiers march singing, their boots splashing through puddles. "One more victory," they say, "one more miracle." But the Empire's old magic feels strained, brittle. His marshals bicker, his scouts miscalculate, his horses are slow. The man who once moved armies like chess pieces is now racing against time itself. At Ligny, he wins, barely. At Quatre Bras, the British hold. The gap between hope and ruin narrows by the hour, and then comes the name that will outlive them all. Waterloo. You arrive on a gray morning, June 18th, as rain lashes the muddy Belgian fields. The French camp is restless, the men shivering under wet blankets. Napoleon, feverish and exhausted, rides along the line to rally them. "Trust in me," he says softly. You can tell he's talking as much to himself as to them. Historians still argue whether illness, timing, or pure bad luck doomed him that day. The rain delays his artillery. The ground turns to sludge. Orders arrive late. Opportunities vanish. Wellington stands firm on the ridge, calm and stubborn. Blücher's Prussians march to join him, their black uniforms slicing through the mist. Cannon smoke thickens until the world becomes a blur of thunder and screams. You see the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's last reserve advance through the chaos, gray-haired veterans, marching with the precision of machines. For a moment, it looks like they might break the British line. But when they falter, the shout rises from the enemy ranks. La garde recule. The guard retreats. The impossible words echo across the field. The French line ripples, then shatters. Panic spreads like fire through dry grass. The last empire of the revolution dissolves in mud and rain. You find him afterward sitting on a fallen tree, cloak drenched, staring at the horizon. "They're too many," he murmurs. "Europe is too many." His hat lies in the mud beside him. He doesn't pick it up. When the remnants of his army flee toward Paris, he follows, silently, without fanfare. For the second time, the throne he built from nothing crumbles beneath his feet. And this time, there will be no escape by sea. Not one that ends in triumph, anyway. Paris greets him this time not with cheers, but with whispers. The carriages rattle past closed shutters. Even the air feels hesitant, like the city itself isn't sure whether to welcome or mourn him. It's late June 1815. The mud of Waterloo still clings to his boots. The emperor, once master of Europe, now returns as a ghost no one quite knows what to do with. He arrives at the Élysée Palace under gray skies. A small crowd gathers outside the gates, but there are no trumpets, no flowers, only murmured disbelief. Some soldiers salute stiffly out of habit, others look away. You can almost hear the unspoken thought hanging over the city. It's over. Inside, the government is already collapsing in slow motion. The politicians who hailed him in March now hide behind committees and legal phrases. The Chamber of Deputies debates national safety, but everyone knows what it means. Someone must take the blame, and it won't be them. Napoleon paces the salon, coat unbuttoned, hair damp with rain. "We can still fight," he insists to anyone who will listen. "France is not conquered, only bruised." His words still carry that strange gravity, but the room around him doesn't. His ministers stare at the floor. Their silence is louder than cannon fire. At last, one voice dares to say what all are thinking. "Sire, the army is broken. The Allies are marching. Paris cannot endure another siege." He stops pacing. The color drains from his face, not in rage, but in realization. For the first time, he sees the truth not as a strategist, but as a man. There's nothing left to command. He spends that night drafting one final proclamation, his handwriting jagged and weary. "The glory of France is not dead," it reads. "It lives in her people, her courage, her unity." He signs it simply, Napoleon, then folds it away. The next morning, June 22nd, 1815, he abdicates, again. This time not in grandeur, but resignation. "I end my reign," he says quietly, "yet I will always love you, France." He asks that his son, the young Napoleon II, be recognized as emperor. The politicians nod politely, already calculating how to ignore him. He returns briefly to Malmaison, Josephine's old estate west of Paris, now hauntingly empty. Roses bloom in the gardens she once tended, their scent heavy in the summer heat. He walks among them in silence, tracing the paths they used to share. "She would have understood," he murmurs. The Allies are closing in. Wellington and Blucher march on the capital, demanding his surrender. He still has options: escape to the south, rally loyalists, even flee to America. A new life, some whisper. You could vanish. But Napoleon doesn't vanish. He steps forward, as he always has, toward history rather than away from it. So he makes a decision that startles everyone. He will surrender to the British. "Better to trust honor than hatred," he says. "I will throw myself on the mercy of the English people." You follow him to Rochefort, a sleepy port on France's Atlantic coast. The sea stretches endlessly, indifferent and blue. Two British warships, Bellerophon and Myrmidon, patrol just beyond the harbor. For days, Napoleon lingers, hoping for permission to sail to America. Bureaucracy delays everything. Rumors swirl. The Allies want him captured. The French government wants him gone. On the night of July 14th, he stands on the shore, the wind whipping his gray coat, and whispers, "They fear even my shadow." He isn't wrong. Finally, on July 15th, he makes his move. At dawn, a small boat carries him across the quiet waves toward the Bellerophon. You can feel the tension in the air, the end of something immense. As he steps onto the British deck, he removes his hat and bows slightly. "I come," he declares to Captain Maitland, "like Themistocles, to throw myself on the hospitality of the British people." It's a noble line, half history, half theater, but the British officers only exchange uneasy glances. The Admiral's orders are clear. He's not a guest, but a prisoner. At first, the crew treats him with cautious respect. He dines with the officers, converses with charm and humor. "If I were not Napoleon," he jokes one night, "I would wish to be an Englishman." They laugh, unsure if they should. When the Bellerophon anchors off the English coast at Torbay, crowds row out to glimpse him. Women wave handkerchiefs, men tip their hats. They stare at the legend who once shook Europe, now pacing the deck like a restless lion behind invisible bars. One child cries out, "Is that him?" Another whispers, "He looks so small." Historians still argue what Britain should have done. Some say they feared he'd stir rebellion even in exile. Others simply didn't want the problem on their doorstep. Whatever the reason, the decision is swift and merciless. Napoleon will be sent far away, to St. Helena, a volcanic rock in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from anywhere. When the news reaches him, he listens in silence. Then, after a long pause, he says, "So be it. I will make this rock famous." The voyage begins in August. You stand on the deck of the ship Northumberland as it cuts through endless gray seas. The crew avoids meeting his gaze. He spends his days walking the deck, staring at the horizon, sketching plans he'll never use again. Some nights he tells stories, Austerlitz, Egypt, Italy, with that old fire in his voice. You almost forget he's lost everything. "Do you think history will remember me kindly?" he asks once, watching the sunset bleed across the water. You hesitate, but he answers for you. "It will remember me. That's enough." After 10 weeks at sea, a dark shape rises from the mist. St. Helena, a desolate island of cliffs and fog, barely 20 miles long. The surf crashes violently against black rocks, as if even the ocean wants to keep him prisoner. The British governor, Sir Hudson Lowe, greets him with stiff formality and immediate restrictions. Napoleon is furious. No correspondence without approval, no walks beyond a few miles, no visitors without permission. His new home, Longwood House, is damp, cramped, and infested with rats. "A palace for ghosts," he mutters. You help him settle in. A few books, a telescope, a portrait of his son. He begins dictating his memoirs to the loyal companions who followed him: Bertrand, Montholon, Las Casas. His days fall into routine. Breakfast at dawn, dictation until noon, a walk in the garden, chess, then long hours staring at the sea. The Atlantic wind never stops. It howls through the shutters, rattles the lamps, whispers through the grass like mocking applause. At first, he tries to keep the mask on, still the emperor, still commanding. He drafts imaginary constitutions, debates history with his aides, lectures about strategy. But the isolation gnaws at him. His health deteriorates. Stomach pains, fever, exhaustion. He gains weight, then loses it rapidly. The doctors whisper about ulcers, or worse. Some nights he can't sleep. You hear him pacing, murmuring the names of battles like prayers. Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram, then quieter still, Josephine. Historians still argue whether he was poisoned by his captors or undone by his own body. Perhaps it doesn't matter. St. Helena itself is poison enough, too remote for escape, too small for peace. Yet even here, the myth grows. Travelers and sailors carry tales of the lonely emperor across the seas. In Europe, his legend swells again. Paintings, songs, and whispers turn defeat into martyrdom. The man who once conquered nations now conquers memory. And you realize, as the trade winds moan outside Longwood's walls, that perhaps this is his final victory. Not over kings or generals, but over time itself. The nights on St. Helena never really turn dark. They turn gray, thick with mist, the ocean breathing like a sleeping animal below the cliffs. You wake to that sound every morning, the hiss of the surf, the mournful cry of seabirds, and wonder how he endures it. Napoleon once commanded a continent. Now his empire is a damp room with a leaking roof and a telescope that shows him nothing but horizon. Longwood House smells of mildew and ink. You watch him hunch over his desk, dictating to Las Casas, his voice steady, his face expressionless. The quills scratch across paper while rain drips through the rafters. History, he says one afternoon, is the version of events people agree to believe. I intend to make them believe mine. That, perhaps, is his new campaign. The war for memory. Every day becomes ritual. He rises at 6, shaves carefully, dresses in his old green coat of the chasseur of the guard. Faded now, buttons dulled, but still gleaming faintly in the gloom. Breakfast, weak coffee, a dry roll. Then, hours of dictation. He speaks endlessly of battles, alliances, betrayals, always framing himself as the architect of order in an age of chaos. They call me a tyrant, he mutters, yet I abolished feudalism in a dozen lands. He rewrites the story of his life like a composer polishing a symphony, cutting, rearranging, inserting crescendos where there had been silence. Sometimes he slips into nostalgia. At Austerlitz, he says, eyes distant, the sun rose for me. It will rise again for France. His companions nod, pen tips trembling in the humidity. They are loyal, but they're aging too. Montholon coughs constantly. Bertrand looks homesick. Even Las Casas, once indefatigable, grows quiet. The island swallows energy like a sponge. Hudson Lowe, the British governor, visits regularly. A polite, inflexible man, obsessed with rules. Every conversation between the two men is a duel without swords. Napoleon mocks him with icy courtesy. Ah, Governor, have you come to inspect your volcano today? Lowe records everything, terrified the prisoner might slip away in the night. It's almost funny. Escape is impossible. The nearest continent is over 1,000 miles away. Still, Napoleon performs. He receives guests as if presiding over a miniature court. When ships stop to resupply, he insists that captains dine with him. He poses questions, tells stories, flirts with their wives, turning exile into theater. They will remember how I behaved, he explains once. Let them say, even in chains, he was an emperor. You sense he half believes it, but the body, indifferent to legend, begins to fail him. The island's dampness gnaws at his joints. His stomach pains worsen. He naps more, eats less. On bad days, he can barely stand. On good ones, he walks the garden path, leaning on a cane. The wind tears at his hat, his coat flapping like the wings of some weary bird. One afternoon, as you help him back indoors, he pauses by the door and stares west. Do you know, he says softly, I still dream of the Tuileries. I walk the corridors and I can smell the wax on the floor. Then I open a door and there is nothing but sea. You don't answer. There's nothing to say. Historians still argue whether his captors treated him cruelly or simply by the book. The truth is duller. Bureaucracy masquerading as justice. Everything he requests, better food, new books, more visitors, takes months of correspondence to approve. When approval finally comes, it's usually too late. They hope boredom will finish me, he jokes. They may be right. And yet, even dying, he can't resist analysis. He debates politics with himself, outlines new constitutions, sketches imaginary wars on scraps of paper. Sometimes he rants about the British government, sometimes about fate, sometimes about humanity itself. Men are led by imagination, he tells you. Destroy their illusions, and they are nothing. Then, more quietly, perhaps that's what's happening to me. The islanders gossip endlessly about him. Some say he still commands secret armies of ghosts. Others swear they've seen him walking at midnight, speaking to the ocean. A few claim he turns into mist at dawn. People always invent myths for those who refuse to die neatly. The years crawl. 1818. 1819. Letters from Europe trickle in. News of his son, now in Vienna, sickly but adored by his grandfather, the Austrian emperor. Napoleon reads every scrap of information about the boy, then folds the pages carefully and locks them away. "My son will avenge me," he says once, though without conviction. When Las Casas is deported by the governor, Napoleon's isolation deepens. He keeps up appearances, still ordering his dinner with military precision, still forcing the small household to address him as sire. But sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, you catch him staring at the empty chair across the table. In 1820, a new visitor arrives, an Englishwoman named Lady Malcolm, curious and sympathetic. She brings gossip, books, and the scent of civilization. For a few months, he seems almost alive again, discussing literature, even teasing her with stories of Josephine. She had the prettiest hands in Europe, he says, looking down at his own trembling fingers. Then spring fades, and so does he. His walks grow shorter, he stops shaving. He dictates less, sleeps more. The pain in his abdomen becomes constant. His doctor, O'Meara, suspects stomach cancer, the same disease that killed his father. The emperor begins preparing for the end as methodically as he once planned campaigns. He dictates his will, gifts for loyal servants, pensions for his officers, instructions for his burial. "I wish to be laid," he says, "on the banks of the Seine, among the French people I have loved so well." He knows it won't happen. He adds another line, "If that cannot be, then under the shade of the willows at St. Helena." Even now, he edits his own death for posterity. On May 5th, 1821, the island wakes to stillness. The wind drops. The surf sounds muffled, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. You sit by his bedside at Longwood, the air heavy with medicine and candle wax. His breathing rattles softly. He mutters in his sleep, fragments of battles, names of marshals, and finally, the word Josephine. Just before sunset, his hand twitches once, then stills. Outside, a single cannon fires, echoing across the cliffs. The gulls scatter into the fog. He is gone. For a moment, the silence feels impossible. How can the world keep turning without him to push it? Yet it does. The soldiers fold his green uniform neatly. The British lower their flags to half-mast. Even Hudson Lowe removes his hat. Whatever their quarrels, they all understand what they've witnessed. Not just a man dying, but a legend completing its circle. They bury him in a valley called Geranium Vale, beneath a cluster of willows he once admired. The tomb is plain. No name, no epitaph. Just a stone slab and the sound of the sea. You stand there as the wind picks up again, carrying the faint scent of salt and freedom. Decades later, when his body is returned to France and reinterred beneath the dome of Les Invalides, crowds will line the streets, weeping and cheering. Poets will call him immortal, tyrant, hero, monster. Each version equally true. But for now, on this lonely rock, the sea is the only witness. Historians still argue what he really was: savior or scourge, genius or madman. You remember something he said once, back when he still believed in tomorrow. There is no good or evil in history, only momentum. And you think maybe that's his real legacy. Not the crowns or the codes or the wars, but momentum. The sense that one human being, armed with vision and audacity, can tilt the world for a while. As the wind rises, You look out toward the endless Atlantic, imagining it flowing all the way back to France. Somewhere beyond that horizon, children play in streets that bear his name. Soldiers drill beneath his statues. Dreamers still whisper his words. The emperor sleeps. The empire breathes on. You blink, and 20 years have passed. Paris hums again, carriages clattering on the cobblestones, women in silk, men in stovepipe hats. But somewhere beneath the noise, the ghost of that old rhythm still beats. Napoleon. His name has become an echo that never fades, a kind of national heartbeat. It's the year 1840, and you stand among the crowd lining the Seine. Flags ripple in the cold wind, soldiers in blue uniforms stand shoulder to shoulder, and the bells of every church in Paris are tolling. France is about to welcome its prodigal emperor home. After 19 years on St. Helena, Napoleon's body is being returned to rest among the French people he loved so well. The news has whipped the country into a frenzy. You see gray-haired veterans of the Grande Armée clutching faded medals, tears streaking through their wrinkles. They murmur old battle names like prayers, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram, as if speaking them might bring the sun back over the horizon. A black funeral barge drifts down the river, draped in violet and gold, bearing a coffin guarded by 4 of his old officers. The air smells of incense and gunpowder. The soldiers salute as it passes. The crowd kneels. You realize that, somehow, he's winning again. Not on the battlefield this time, but in memory. Even his enemies, now ancient and frail, concede that the world feels smaller without him. He changed everything, one British observer mutters. Even our defeats belong to his legend. At Les Invalides, the newly built tomb gleams beneath a golden dome, vast and solemn. You walk inside with the crowd, descending the circular staircase that spirals down toward the red sarcophagus. The air is cool and smells faintly of stone dust and roses. The silence is reverent, almost sacred. There he lies, encased in 6 coffins nested like armor, the innermost of mahogany, the outermost of red quartzite. Resting beneath the Latin inscription, "Here lies Napoleon I, Emperor of the French." For a long moment, no one speaks. Then, somewhere behind you, a woman whispers, "He is home." And you realize what this moment really is. Not the burial of a tyrant, nor the coronation of a saint, but the closing of a circle. The man who tried to rule the world is finally at rest in the heart of the nation he built and broke. But as history always does, France moves on. Monarchies rise, fall, and rise again. Republics flicker like candles. And each time the country teeters, someone inevitably asks, what would Napoleon have done? Historians, of course, can't agree on the answer. Some see him as the father of modern France, the man who gave the nation its laws, its centralized administration, its meritocracy. They point to the Napoleonic Code, still the backbone of French civil law. They point to the Bank of France, the Lycée system, the Council of State. They say, he built the modern state from the rubble of revolution. Others call him the gravedigger of liberty, the man who betrayed the revolution's ideals, replacing freedom with order, citizens with subjects. They remember the censorship, the wars, the mountains of dead. They say, he traded democracy for discipline and crowned himself Caesar. And the truth, like most truths, sits uneasily between. You walk through modern Paris, the straight boulevards, the uniform architecture, the monuments, and realize how much of it bears his signature. Even the city's geometry feels Napoleonic, precise, efficient, a general's mind translated into urban form. Every time the traffic flows smoothly through the Place de l'Étoile, you're moving through his idea of order. Beyond France, his shadow stretches even further. The Napoleonic Code spreads across Europe and beyond, to Belgium, Italy, Spain, Poland, Latin America. Wherever it goes, feudalism withers and modern bureaucracy takes root. The old aristocracies never recover. And in military academies from West Point to Tokyo, his campaigns are still dissected line by line. His principles, Speed, concentration of force, maneuver, morale become the gospel of modern warfare. Even the generals who one day fight against his memory will study him first. But what lingers most isn't the laws or the battles. It's the myth, the story of the boy from Corsica who climbed higher than anyone thought possible. The man who built an empire out of ambition, intellect, and sheer audacity. The dreamer who burned the map of Europe and redrew it by hand. In taverns and classrooms, on ships and in barracks, people still whisper his name, not out of fear, but fascination. He becomes a symbol for the impossible, for the dangerous idea that one person can bend the age to their will. You imagine him now, walking the halls of history like he once walked the fields of Austerlitz, hands clasped behind his back, head bowed slightly, calculating, observing. Maybe he's still arguing with historians in some corner of eternity, defending his choices, insisting the world just misunderstood. Was I a tyrant? You can almost hear him say, then tell me why the people still cheer. Even the great philosophers can't resist him. Hegel calls him the world spirit on horseback. Tolstoy writes War and Peace just to wrestle with his meaning. Beethoven dedicates a symphony to him, then rips the page in fury when he crowns himself emperor. Painters, poets, novelists. Each generation finds its own Napoleon, its own reflection in his restless ambition. You stand again before the tomb, looking down into that quiet, red stone chamber. The crowd around you murmurs, then falls silent. You realize that, in a way, he's won the final campaign, not over nations, but over mortality. Kings vanish, ideologies rot, but the name Napoleon still stirs something electric in the air. Historians still argue whether he was Europe's last Enlightenment hero or its first modern dictator. But to you, staring into that eternal stillness, it's clear he was both, a paradox given flesh. He freed millions and enslaved nations. He built institutions that outlived him and destroyed lives that never recovered. And maybe that's why he endures. Because Napoleon Bonaparte isn't just a person anymore. He's a mirror. Every generation looks into it and sees what it fears or what it desires most. You imagine telling him that, if you could, that 2 centuries later, his name would still sell books, inspire revolutions, haunt politicians? He'd probably smile that half smile and say, of course. Did you expect mediocrity? The trumpets of the funeral procession fade, but their echo lingers. Somewhere, a child asks his father, who was he? And the father answers, a man who tried to rule the world. The boy nods, thoughtfully, eyes wide. And in that moment, you understand. The legend begins again, reborn in every curious mind that hears his story. Outside, Paris is bathed in late afternoon light. The Seine shimmers like melted gold. Carriages rumble, pigeons scatter, the city hums. Alive, modern, indifferent, yet somehow still his. Napoleon once said, "Men of genius are meteors, destined to burn so that others may see by their light." As you walk away from the tomb, the quote rings true. The light still burns, faint but steady, across the centuries. And as you glance back one last time at that great dome gleaming against the sky, you feel the quiet weight of his paradox settle over you. Hero and tyrant, savior and destroyer, man and myth. In the end, maybe history never decides. Maybe it just remembers. You step out into the Paris evening, that soft twilight where the sky turns lavender above the Seine. The wind carries the smell of chestnuts and rain. The city hums with the same restlessness that once defined him. Napoleon's spirit somehow woven into its rhythm. Even now, long after his bones found rest beneath the gilded dome, France can't quite stop moving at his pace. You can feel it everywhere. In the symmetry of the boulevards, in the bureaucracy that keeps trains running on time, in the quiet pride of a nation that believes organization itself is an art. He's gone, yes, but his fingerprints remain on every ledger, every law, every officer's salute. The emperor may have died on an island, but the Napoleonic machine never stopped ticking. The France of the mid-19th century is not the France he ruled, but it's one he built the blueprints for. The civil code regulates everything from marriage to inheritance. The lycée produces the bureaucrats who run the state, and the Bank of France anchors the economy he once nearly bankrupted. Even the metric system, his instrument of rational order, spreads across the world like a quiet revolution of decimals and reason. And beyond France, the map he tore apart still hasn't quite healed. Germany, Italy, Poland, each carry scars and sparks left by his conquests. He didn't create nationalism, but he gave it shape. By trying to dominate Europe, he accidentally taught it how to define itself. Every nation conquered by Napoleon learned how to be itself again, one historian says. And you can see the irony smiling faintly behind the truth. Walk through Berlin, and you'll find the Brandenburg Gate, once draped in French banners. In Milan, you'll see statues of him cast as a Roman god. In Warsaw, Poles still toast the emperor, who for a fleeting moment made them believe their country could be reborn. In London, his name still tastes of thunder. Britain's victory at Waterloo became its national myth, the mirror image of his legend. The island that feared invasion by the Corsican ogre now defines itself by having defeated him. Yet even there, generals study his campaigns with admiration, thinly disguised as caution. You can almost hear them whisper, "Learn from him, but never become him." And then there's America. Across the Atlantic, presidents and generals alike borrow his language: efficiency, merit, destiny. The West Point curriculum is steeped in his principles. You stand on a hill overlooking the Hudson, where cadets still march to the sound of drums, learning about concentration of force, speed of maneuver, morale. The gospel, according to Bonaparte. Even Japan, half a world away, builds its Meiji military reforms on the skeleton of Napoleonic organization. His ideas outlive the empire that birthed them, as ideas always do. But legend is a double-edged sword. For every admirer sketching his face on banners, there's another warning against his shadow. In the decades that follow his death, Europe produces a parade of imitators, men who wear his hat, in imagination, if not in reality. They chase glory through industry, through ideology, through empire, each invoking his name like a spell and forgetting how the story ends. Napoleon complex, psychologists will one day call it, a small man's hunger for vast control. The phrase will outlast almost every general who tries to repeat him. Yet, for all the warnings, the fascination never fades. Painters like Delacroix and Gérôme capture him bathed in divine light, storming across snowy passes on white horses. Writers resurrect him in every mood. Victor Hugo calls him the god of war fallen from heaven, while Byron writes him as a tragic titan strangled by destiny. Even Dostoevsky can't resist. His characters dream of being Napoleon, equating greatness with freedom from morality. He's no longer just a man. He's a psychological category. Ambition itself wears his name. You walk through a museum gallery lined with portraits. Here he stands in coronation robes, hand tucked into his waistcoat. There he's on horseback, cloak flaring like a crimson wing. In another, he's smaller, thoughtful, sitting alone in exile. Together they form a timeline of human desire, from triumph to solitude. You pause before one painting in particular, David's Napoleon crossing the Alps. The emperor rides a rearing white stallion, cloak whipping in the wind, pointing skyward as if commanding destiny itself. You remember the truth. In reality, he rode a mule that day, hunched against the cold. But the lie feels truer. History, after all, prefers poetry to accuracy. It's strange, isn't it? How the world can admire and condemn the same man with equal fervor. Teachers call him a genius. Pacifists call him a monster. Both are right. He left Europe covered in graves and progress at once, a continent simultaneously broken and remade. You imagine him watching from whatever afterlife he's negotiated for himself, amused. "They still argue," he'd say. "Good. That means I won." But the story doesn't end in monuments and textbooks. His bloodline carries on, however faintly. His nephew, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, will ride his uncle's name all the way to power in 1848, becoming Napoleon III, Emperor of the French once more. The cycle repeats: charisma, reform, censorship, empire, collapse. History doesn't just remember Napoleon, it imitates him. The irony is rich enough to make even the dead grin. The first Napoleon built his legend through war, the second through railroads and boulevards. But both men shared the same fatal flaw. They mistook speed for permanence. And maybe that's the real moral beneath all the uniforms and cannon smoke. His victories were never meant to last. They were meant to move, to show what happens when human will outruns its own limits. You stand again on the bridge over the Seine, watching the water slide beneath you. The city lights shimmer across the surface like shifting metals. You realize that Napoleon's greatest creation wasn't France's empire, or even its laws. It was momentum. A belief that history itself could be engineered, planned, executed like a campaign. It's a seductive idea, one the modern world still can't quite shake. Every revolution, every regime promising order out of chaos, every leader who claims destiny instead of responsibility, they're all, in some quiet way, his descendants. But tonight, Paris feels peaceful. Somewhere an accordion plays. Laughter drifts from a cafe. The war drums have fallen silent, replaced by conversation and wine and the murmur of civilization. Perhaps this is the empire he truly built. Not of soldiers, but of rhythm. You picture him walking these streets invisibly, surveying his work. Maybe he'd smile at the symmetry, the confidence, the pulse. Or maybe he'd shake his head, impatient for another challenge. Napoleon was never content with stillness, even in victory. As you turn toward home, a faint drizzle begins to fall, soft and rhythmic against the cobblestones. You think of him on Elba, on the battlefield, on that final rock in the Atlantic. All those moments when he stared out at the horizon and saw not the end, but another beginning. That's what keeps him alive in the collective imagination. Not the conquests, not the crown, but the refusal to accept finality. He lived as if the world were clay, and his hands were never meant to stop shaping it. You whisper to the rain, "Rest now, Emperor." But the rain doesn't listen. It keeps falling, steady, endless. Like history, like ambition, like the footsteps of soldiers still marching somewhere in the back of your mind. Because no matter how many years pass, you can't quite escape the rhythm he left behind. The rhythm of order and chaos, vision and ruin, genius and mistake. Napoleon Bonaparte may be long dead, but Europe still moves to his tempo. You're back in the present now, or something like it. The centuries between you and him have thinned to a veil, and yet his presence still hums under everything. When you walk through Europe, its rail lines, its ministries, its endless committees, you can almost hear his voice in the machinery. The empire may have fallen, but its habits endure. In Paris, the street lamps flicker on at dusk, tracing lines of light down Haussmann's boulevards. You look at the geometry of the city, the symmetry, the logic, and realize that it's still ruled by his favorite word, order. The revolution birthed freedom. Napoleon built walls around it, measured it, filed it in triplicate. That paradox never really left. Everywhere, echoes. France's prefect system, those local administrators he created, still hums along with mechanical precision. The Court of Cassation still interprets law by the code he ordered drafted. In courts from Brussels to Buenos Aires, judges still cite principles born from his pen. Even the way governments talk about efficiency and rational planning feels like his ghost editing the minutes. You wander through a courthouse. On the marble wall etched in Latin, "Lex est quod notamus," "The law is what we write." You smile. That could have been his motto. For a man obsessed with control, writing was the only immortality that mattered. Historians still wrestle with the math of his legacy. Add the bodies. 3 million dead across Europe, villages erased, empires toppled. Subtract the rot he cleared away. Feudalism, hereditary privilege, chaos. The balance sheet is unclear, but the handwriting unmistakable. The ink is his. Yet, the strangest thing about Napoleon's memory is how elastic it's become. He belongs to everyone and no one. Revolutionaries admire his audacity. Conservatives admire his discipline. Even republics, those governments that would have guillotined him, borrow his administrative structure. It's as if Europe can't stop copying the very system it claims to have outgrown. You picture him smirking somewhere beyond the veil, watching presidents and prime ministers march to his beat. "They have kept my empire," he might whisper, "but forgotten my name." In classrooms, students still memorize the dates. Austerlitz 1805, Jena 1806, Borodino 1812, Waterloo 1815. But they don't memorize the smell of gunpowder, or the way a horse screams when it falls, or how frost clings to a soldier's lashes in a Russian dawn. They know the shape of his victories, not their temperature. You, though, you remember. You can almost hear it, the crack of muskets, the thud of drums, the sharp bark of his commands slicing through the chaos. That relentless rhythm again. Even now it won't stop. And yet, beneath the iron and the smoke, there was always something almost tender about his contradictions. The same man who built empires, also obsessed over the scent of violets, wrote love letters that read like fever dreams, and carried a miniature portrait of Josephine through every campaign. The same man who ordered cities burned also built orphanages, hospitals, schools. Perhaps that's why his story refuses to die. It's not clean. You can't file him under monster or genius without the drawer bursting open. You stand by the Seine again, near the Pont de la Concorde, where street artists sell charcoal portraits of him. Sharp hat, gray coat, hand tucked in vest. The tourists stop, snap photos, move on. The artists keep drawing. People love him, one tells you with a shrug. Not for what he did, but for what he was. A man who refused to be small. That's it, isn't it? Napoleon wasn't just a ruler. He was an idea. The idea that one person's will could outshout fate. Dangerous, yes, but irresistible. Across the Channel, the British still carry his ghost too. Walk through London's museums and you'll find glass cases of captured banners, sabers, medals, all trophies from the wars fought to contain him. Yet in the same breath, they quote his brilliance. The man they once called the Corsican fiend now shares shelves with Shakespeare and Newton. There's something almost grudgingly affectionate in the way they remember him. A worthy enemy. Elsewhere, the legacy fractures in stranger ways. In Latin America, independence leaders like Simón Bolívar model their revolutions on his example. They take his language of liberation and bend it to their own causes. The irony would make him laugh. His blueprint for empire repurposed to destroy empires. And in the 20th century, darker echoes. Dictators study him obsessively. How to inspire devotion, how to harness nationalism, how to fuse charisma with bureaucracy. They copy his posture, his imagery, even his rhetoric, but none grasp the part he never said aloud. That ambition, without measure, eventually turns inward, devouring itself. The world learns that lesson again and again, and still forgets. You visit Les Invalides one more time. Inside, the air is thick with incense and reverence. The sarcophagus glows under the dome's soft light, surrounded by marble angels frozen in grief. Tourists whisper, children fidget, the guards' boots echo softly on the stone. You lean over the railing and stare down at that colossal tomb. For all its grandeur, it feels almost intimate now. like a monument not to conquest, but to exhaustion. There's an inscription nearby, carved into bronze. "I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine." He got his wish. But what he couldn't have known is how the world would keep rewriting him, generation after generation, each version bending to its own reflection. Napoleon the hero, Napoleon the tyrant, Napoleon the reformer, Napoleon the monster, Napoleon the dreamer. The labels blur together, each one true for a moment before the next arrives. It's strange to think how small the real man must have been. 5'6", dark hair, quick eyes, a faint Corsican accent. The portraits make him larger than life, but the accounts from those who served him describe something else. A quiet intensity, a mind that never idled, a gaze that made people forget their own names. His eyes, one aide wrote, saw through you as if you were a map. Maybe that's how he ruled, by turning everyone into a landscape to be navigated, conquered, redrawn. You step back outside, into the hum of modern traffic. The city around you feels older and newer all at once. Electric buses glide where cavalry once charged. Tourists sip coffee on the same stones where revolutionaries once bled. Yet beneath the hum, there's still a faint percussion, the sound of drums, of marching boots, of inevitability. You wonder what he'd think of this France. Democratic, fractious, free. Would he sneer at its chaos or admire its persistence? Would he recognize his own handiwork in the bureaucracy that governs it, or laugh that it's still so efficient? Probably both. Napoleon always did love contradiction. You cross the bridge toward the Latin Quarter, where students argue politics beneath chestnut trees. Their words float up: justice, equality, reform, big dreams, reckless energy. You smile. It's familiar. You can almost hear him in their voices, urging them on, whispering, "Think bigger, dream faster, move." He's still here, in the rhythm of it all. You pause by the river one last time. The water glints like steel beneath the fading light, rolling slow but unstoppable. You think of his last words. Simple, almost childlike. France, army, head of the army. Josephine. The man who mastered Europe ended his life whispering to memory. And maybe that's what makes his story so haunting. Because for all his talk of destiny, in the end he wanted what everyone does, to be remembered kindly, to be understood. The wind picks up. Somewhere in the city, a bell tolls. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can almost feel him beside you again. Cloak snapping in the breeze, eyes sharp, already searching for the next horizon. Then the feeling fades, and only the river remains, steady, endless, reflecting the lights of the city he shaped and the world that still walks in his footsteps. The river keeps moving, as rivers do, patient and indifferent, long after empires vanish. And you can't quite shake the sense that you're still walking inside his dream. Every monument, every flag, every parade feels like some faint aftershock of that thunderclap life that once split Europe open. You wander through modern Paris as twilight folds itself into the Seine. The cafes glow warm behind their glass, laughter mixing with the sound of jazz. The Eiffel Tower sparkles in the distance, a creation of a different century, yet somehow a spiritual heir to his ambition. Iron instead of empire, engineering instead of conquest, but still the same pulse. Make it bigger, make it last. That's what he left behind more than anything else. A scale of thinking that refuses to be small. You walk down the Rue de Rivoli, the boulevard he ordered built, and the past begins to blur with the present. The buildings stand in strict formation, every column and cornice aligned like troops on parade. His obsession with symmetry still shapes the city's skeleton. Even the traffic lights feel disciplined, clicking from red to green with military precision. The world has grown faster since his time. Steel rails, electric wires, satellites. But in some secret rhythm, it still moves to his tempo. He taught Europe that progress comes from willpower, that history can be engineered if you just push hard enough. Every industrialist, every statesman, every visionary who believes in control owes him a debt, whether they know it or not. And yet, the irony lingers. The man who worshipped order also unleashed chaos. The man who promised peace through power created wars that never really ended. His rise and fall became a pattern the modern age would replay, again and again. Strongmen with visions too bright to see the edges. You pause at a newsstand. The headlines shout about politics, markets, diplomacy. The language changes, but the tone feels familiar. Strategy, alliances, ambition. Europe still negotiates like a battlefield. Nations circling each other warily, drawing and redrawing invisible borders. It's softer now, conducted in conference halls instead of cavalry charges, but it's the same old choreography. And there he is again, in the margins. Every time a leader reaches too far, every time a movement promises destiny, someone whispers his name like a warning. Careful, they say, remember Napoleon. Yet people rarely do. The myth is too seductive. He remains a paradox, proof that greatness is possible, and proof that it destroys. You step into a small bookshop near Saint-Germain. In the window, an entire shelf glows gold with his name. Napoleon, the man, the myth, the legend. You pull one at random. New biography, same questions. The author promises the true Napoleon. You laugh softly. There is no true Napoleon. There are 1,000, each sculpted by whoever needs him most. For patriots, he's the savior of France. For scholars, he's the father of modern law. For generals, he's the architect of strategy. For moralists, he's a warning carved in marble. For dreamers, he's the proof that a single human being can bend the world, even briefly, to their will. That's the thing about him. He doesn't belong to history. He belongs to imagination. You find yourself thinking back to the boy in Corsica, the one mocked for his accent, devouring Plutarch and dreaming of Caesar. Did he know, even then, that he would become one of them? Or did he simply refuse to believe he couldn't? He once said, "Imagination rules the world." You used to think it was arrogance. Now you wonder if it was prophecy. Outside, the rain begins again. Soft, rhythmic. The same drizzle that's fallen on Paris for centuries. You duck beneath an awning and watch people hurry past. A student clutching books, a woman with a red umbrella, a soldier in uniform talking into a phone. The uniforms have changed, the weapons too, but the posture is the same. Straight-backed, disciplined, proud. A faint echo of his army still marches in every French cadence. Historians like to dissect him into statistics and reforms, but you know better. Napoleon's real kingdom was emotion. He ruled through imagination, his own first, then everyone else's. He understood that victory wasn't just about musket fire. It was about myth, about how people felt when they looked at him. Even now, that alchemy works. Say Napoleon, and people sit up a little straighter. The name carries weight, like a drumbeat in the collective memory. You start walking again, toward the Champs-Élysées, where the Arc de Triomphe looms through the mist. It's colossal, carved with names of battles, its surface alive with victory scenes frozen in stone. Beneath it, the tomb of the unknown soldier flickers with its eternal flame, a quiet counterpoint to all the noise he made. You stand between the two, the arch built for him and the flame kept for the countless who died following dreams like his. And the tension is almost unbearable. Maybe this is what the modern world learned from Napoleon, that glory always costs more than it pays, but somehow we keep buying. You imagine him walking beside you through the rain, the brim of his bicorn dripping, his expression thoughtful. They remember me, he might say, half pleased, half annoyed, but they've learned nothing. You'd probably laugh because he'd be right. Humanity keeps chasing the same horizon. Progress, power, perfection, convinced this time it won't end in fire. But it always does, doesn't it? Still, maybe there's another lesson in his story, a gentler one that gets buried under the cannons and coronations. For all his ego, Napoleon believed in competence, in the idea that talent should rise above birth. He opened doors that had been locked for centuries. Meritocracy, imperfect as it is, was his rebellion against destiny. That dream survives too. In classrooms, boardrooms, governments, the notion that brilliance, not lineage, should rule, that anyone can rise. Even a poor Corsican boy with bad French and impossible ambition. You reach the top of the Champs-Élysées just as the rain stops. The clouds part, and for a heartbeat, the city glows in the sunset. The gold dome of Les Invalides gleams far off, catching the light like a coin flipped by the gods. It feels almost theatrical, as if the city itself is bowing toward him one last time. You lean on the railing, watching the lights flicker to life, and think about all the other conquerors who came after him. They studied his tactics, his reforms, his mistakes, and still repeated them. Maybe that's what immortality really looks like. Not sainthood, but recursion. The same story, told again and again, with different uniforms and flags. A breeze sweeps through, cool and steady. Somewhere, a church bell tolls the hour. You imagine him hearing it, counting it, planning his next move even now. The sound fades into the hum of the city, a reminder that time always wins, even over emperors. And yet, walking away, you feel oddly calm, because for all his storms, Napoleon left behind a strange kind of order. Not peace, exactly, but momentum made flesh. The world he helped forge, industrial, centralized, restless, still turns in his image. You think of something he said near the end, scribbled between bouts of pain. I closed the abyss of anarchy, and I opened the path of the modern world. Maybe he was right, or maybe he just wanted to believe he hadn't lived and died for nothing. Either way, as you turn toward the Seine once more, you realize he got what every dreamer wants. He was seen, he was feared, he was remembered. And the current of history still carries his reflection downstream, blurred, refracted, but unbroken. The night folds in around you, quiet except for the steady whisper of the river. Somewhere, a light flickers out. Somewhere else, another one ignites. The empire is long gone, but the echo remains, soft, insistent, eternal. The rain has washed the streets clean. The gaslights shimmer on the wet cobblestones like constellations fallen to earth. And for a fleeting moment, Paris feels weightless, like a city half remembering its dream of empire. You wander toward the Seine once more, the river gliding in the dark like a sheet of liquid glass. Somewhere in the distance, church bells strike 10, the same hour that once summoned soldiers, ministers, and destiny itself to his command. You pause on a bridge, the air sharp with autumn. The water below moves quietly, endlessly, the same way time moves, slow but absolute. The reflections ripple, blurring the lights of the city into streaks of gold. And standing there, you realize that Napoleon's story isn't really about France anymore. It's about humanity itself, the relentless hunger to shape the world before it shapes us. You think of that boy from Corsica again. Not the emperor, not the conqueror, the child who read by candlelight, dreaming of glory in a language that wasn't even his own. What kind of fire must live in a soul to push it from an island to the center of the world? Maybe that's the question that keeps us fascinated. Not what he achieved, but why he believed he could. Historians still argue the details. Was he a genius or a gambler? A savior or a scourge? The truth is that Napoleon was both mirror and magnifier. Whatever Europe already was, he amplified. He took the Enlightenment's rational order and drove it with revolutionary will. He turned France's chaos into hierarchy and its ideals into armies. He was the revolution's child who wanted to be its father. And in that contradiction, freedom chained by discipline, he built the modern age. You walk on, your footsteps echoing under the colonnades of the Louvre, once his palace. The rain beads on the marble statues, dripping from their eyes as though they weep for the centuries. You imagine him here, striding through these halls at midnight, lantern in hand, surveying the art he seized from across Europe. He saw beauty the same way he saw territory, something to be claimed, ordered, catalogued. Even art became part of his campaign. He wasn't wrong about one thing. The future belonged to organization. The chaos of monarchy gave way to the architecture of bureaucracy. He built systems that still outlive their creator. Postal networks, censuses, tax codes, conscription, education. The very idea of a centralized nation-state, strong, rational, efficient, was his true empire. You stop at the courtyard of the Louvre pyramid, glass and steel rising where his horses once stamped. The modern world sparkles back at you, sleek and self-assured. Every light, every reflection seems to say the same thing he once did. We can design our own destiny. But under that brilliance, there's a shadow. The same drive that lifted him, the obsession with perfection, control, inevitability, still hums beneath our age. We've replaced sabers with data, cannons with algorithms, but the ambition is unchanged, to master chance, to command the uncontrollable. Maybe that's why his legend refuses to rest. Because Napoleon wasn't just a man, he was an early draft of the modern mind, calculating, restless, convinced that willpower can rewrite reality. You see him in CEOs, generals, politicians, even artists, anyone who mistakes momentum for meaning. He once said, "Impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools." The world applauded then. Now, you wonder if it should have trembled. Yet, it's hard to judge him completely. For all the ruin, he also gave structure to chaos. He taught nations how to think strategically, how to plan, how to measure. Even the act of remembrance, our need to make sense of history, owes something to him. You pass a group of tourists taking photos of Les Invalides. Their camera flashes blink like musket fire against the dome. You can almost hear the footsteps of the old guard echoing through the courtyard, their boots thudding in slow unison. They're long gone, but the rhythm lingers. Somewhere inside, beneath layers of stone, he still lies. Red granite, mahogany, lead, iron, tin, oak, a fortress of coffins around a single man. He always did prefer fortifications. You close your eyes and imagine him waking there, stretching, adjusting his cuffs. "So," he might say, "what century is it now?" You'd tell him it's the 21st. He'd nod, unfazed. "And who commands it?" "No one," you'd reply. "Or everyone. Or maybe just the algorithm." He'd frown at that. "A machine without ambition is nothing," he'd say. "Even tyranny requires purpose." You smile at the thought. Absurd and somehow comforting. Because maybe that's what we've lost. The dangerous grandeur of believing too much. The courage and the curse of thinking one mind could reorder the world. He believed in destiny. We believe in data. But both are ways of pretending we're not adrift. You sit on a bench overlooking the river, and the city seems to settle around you. The hum of cars fades, the wind softens, and all that's left is the sound of water brushing stone. You picture him again on that last island, looking out over the Atlantic, tracing shapes in the waves. Did he know he'd already won? That his story would outlive his empire by centuries? Or did he still feel, even then, that one more campaign was just beyond the horizon? He was right about one thing. Legends don't die. They just change shape. Across time, his image fractures into reflections. Statue, symbol, warning, inspiration. A boy in a history class underlines his name. A filmmaker stages his downfall in 4K. A general quotes his maxims. A student scribbles, "Imagination rules the world," in the margins of a notebook. The world keeps talking to him, and he keeps answering. You rise and start walking again. The city glows behind you. The river murmurs below. And the stars, what few managed to pierce the haze, seemed to hang where his ambition once did, bright, unreachable, eternal. You think of the last line of his will. I die before my time, murdered by the English oligarchy and its assassins. But I die reconciled with my fate and with the French people. It sounds bitter and grandiose, like everything he ever said. But there's peace in it too. The peace of someone who finally stopped marching. Maybe that's how you should leave him. Not as emperor or exile, not as hero or villain, but as a man who refused to be ordinary. Hey guys, if you've stayed with me all this way, through the battles, the laws, the myths, through the rise and fall of one of history's brightest and darkest flames, thank you. You've walked in the footsteps of a man who once tried to outpace time itself. And maybe, in some small way, you've felt the pull of that same current, the desire to leave a mark too deep to wash away. So before you drift asleep, remember this. Ambition is a fire. It can warm the world, or it can burn it down. The trick, perhaps, is to know when to stop feeding it. Now, dim the lights. Let the rain outside become the ocean between centuries. Let the hum of your fan be the wind over Elba, or the rustle of flags above the Tuileries. And as you close your eyes, picture the Seine flowing past the Golden Dome, carrying the reflection of 1,000 streetlights, each one a tiny echo of the meteors that once streaked across Europe under his name. The Emperor rests. The world still turns. And you, drifting towards sleep, can almost hear the faintest sound, distant drums fading into eternity. So here we are, at the quiet edge of the story, the part after the battles end and the torches go out. The room feels still now, the air a little softer, as if the ghosts have finally taken their leave. The world outside keeps moving, cars whispering on wet streets, but inside, you're safe in the calm after the storm. Take a slow breath. Let it fill your lungs and ease your shoulders. The noise of history fades, replaced by something gentler, the steady rhythm of your heartbeat, the ancient sound of peace returning. Imagine the river again, smooth and silver, carrying away the weight of everything that came before. The names, the empires, the victories, all dissolve into the water. What remains is only the lesson that power is fleeting, but purpose endures, that even the brightest star must one day cool, leaving light enough to guide those who come next. Somewhere in the dark, a clock ticks. The seconds fall like quiet footsteps. You've reached the end of the march. The story has done its work. Close your eyes. Let the world exhale with you. The drums have gone silent. The Emperor sleeps. And so should you.